It has been a little over a year since the widely unloved Murders at Karlov Manor set was released, but despite the sentiment towards the set, there were several commanders that were picked up by the community. After 1 year, the top commanders from the set are Voja Jaws of the Conclave with 14,400 decks, Judith Carnage Connoisseur with 8,827 decks, Massacre Girl Known Killer with 4,951 decks, and Ansrag the Quake Mole with 4,526 decks. There are quite a few commanders, however, that didn't receive that much love. In this video, I'll be covering the 4 most unpopular commanders from Murders at Karlov Manor after 1 year of being released. I'll share my thoughts on the commanders, and if I were to make a deck, how I would build the commander, and a few types of cards and strategies I would approach the deck with. So let's jump right in. It's kind of funny because we're starting our list off with the 4th most unpopular commander from the set, and it's actually one that I have a deck for, and it is a very high win rate deck of mine at the local game stores. That commander is Izoni, Center of the Web, who has 536 decks. Izoni is a 6 mana, 5/4 elf detective with menace. It says, whenever Izoni enters the Center of the Web enters the battlefield or attacks, you may collect evidence 4. If you do, create 2 2/1 black and green spider creature tokens with menace and reach. She also has an ability that says, sacrifice 4 tokens, surveil 2, then draw 2 cards. You gain 2 life. I really like Izoni, and for some reason, despite having a powerful ability, Izoni usually stays on the board for a few turns before people decide to do anything about it. So I usually have quite a bit of time to start building up my board and doing a strategy. I wish I could say, I took a super unique approach for this deck, but in all honesty, this commander sounded really fun to just make a lot of tokens and use those tokens as resources to either sacrifice to Izoni's ability or to other cards. So I did kind of go the approach of the deck that you might think reading the ability. Another interesting thing about Izoni is that the ability kind of encourages the use of instants and sorceries that you wouldn't normally use. And what I mean by that is I run graveyard recursion cards like Marin of Clan Nel Toth, Rise of the Witch Queen, King, and Reanimate or Deadly Brew. So since I do have some graveyard recursion, I don't really want to exile my creatures permanently with Izoni's ability. For that reason, Izoni works well with sorceries and instants because Golgari cares more about bringing back creatures as opposed to these spells, these instants and sorceries. So cards like the mentioned Rise of the Witch King, why do I keep trying to say Queen, Sky Shroud Claim, etc., all work really well because you can collect evidence 4 and exile just these cards as opposed to your 2 mana or multiple 3 mana creatures. My game plan for this deck is pretty simple. Try to get as many tokens on the battlefield and ideally in huge bursts out of nowhere, as opposed to slowly over time, which would make people wary of my growing board state and kind of raise some alarm bells. As a result, it pays off to build a couple of pieces before I cast my big token generation spells, so I have payoffs in place. For example, aristocrat pieces, or whenever you gain life, opponents lose life cards like Dina Soul Steeper or Veto are just amazing with this deck. I try to go for some more of like the sturdy cards like Bastion of Remembrance or Agent of the Iron Throne, so it's harder to get rid of. I will say, in most of my decks, I actually don't run Game Changers, so I don't use cards like Doubling Season or Parallel Lives, but I do have some other cards that create tokens when I create tokens, like Chatterfang. Some of the other cards that have performed very well at creating just a ton of tokens from one card are cards like Saproling Symbiosis, which creates a 1/1 for each creature I control. Sylvan Offering is just amazing as well. It is 1 and X and says, Choose an opponent. You and that player create an XX green treefolk creature token. Also choose an opponent. You and that player create X 1/1 green elf warrior tokens. So this scales with the game and can always create as many as I need for the time in the game. And I'm usually able to leverage those tokens better than the opponents that I choose. Another thing, Second Harvest is just insane, but that's kind of expected. It's a well-known card at what it does. I also love Pest Infestation as an artifact or enchantment removal card, but it also says up to. So if you don't have as many targets as you need, but just want a lot of pests, those can be pretty game-changing when you pair it with Aristocrat and life gain cards like Dina's Soul Steeper. Chalk Outline is nice because it creates 2 tokens whenever one creature leaves my graveyard, and that includes if it comes back to my hand or the battlefield. And a reminder, Izoni says sacrifice 4 tokens, so it doesn't specify any kind, like not 4 creature tokens. So the fact that this creates a creature token and I investigate, that means that I can use both of those tokens. Izuri's Predation also creates a ton of tokens while doing a good job at cleaning up a lot of my opponent's boards. Another very, I think, just overall underrated card is Endrick Sar, who creates a ton of tokens, and I don't need to worry at all about controlling 7 or more thralls because it never gets close. Like, if it does get close, I just sacrifice 4 to Izoni's ability, and then I surveil 2, draw 2, and gain 2 life. Pitiless Plunderer is really good because if I sacrifice 4 creatures, I then create 4 treasure tokens that I can also then sacrifice to Izoni again. So it replaces themselves with other sackable tokens. The last token, like big token generator that I'll mention is Sazat's Will. The second ability says exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards, then create X01 Black Thrall creature tokens where X is the greatest power among creature cards exiled this way. I've already talked a lot, so I'll cut this a little bit short, but a few other top performers are Savra, Queen of the Golgari. Sylvan Anthem lets me funnel through my deck for cards that I need because I'm just generating a lot of creature tokens, 2 for every time that I use Izoni's ability. Elven Chorus helps to cast big cards like Sylvan Offering, and Crossing Drawbridge is also great because it can give Izoni and all my tokens haste to create 4 Menace Spider tokens the turn Izoni comes down. And I also mentioned that Dina Soul Steeper has won me pretty much every game that I've been able to cast it. There have been many games when I've been targeted down and I'm at less than 10 life, then the next turn I gain over 40 life and kill the entire board. Like, I could start the turn with 4 small creatures and Izoni, attack and create 2 more with Izoni's ability, then cast something like Saproling Symbiosis for 4 mana, then Dina for 2 mana. I then sacrifice 12 creatures. And with this, with a Bastion of Remembrance on the board, that gives me 12 life. Dina drains the board for 12 life because I just gained the 12 life. And then from the 12 creatures that died, I also surveil 6, draw 6, and gain 6 life for the 3 resolutions, which is 6 more drained to the board. So it's just pretty easy to, when you have an instant speed sack that has a good effect, it just does really well. I'll share the full deck list in the Patreon Discord in the deck list tab for anyone that's interested in seeing the entire deck list. The third most unpopular commander from Murders at Karlov Manor is Kellan Inquisitive Prodigy with 488 decks. From now on, I'm going to clarify, these are decks that I have not created, and they are not full deck techs, but I'll share my take on the commander and how I would approach a build if I had to. So Kellan is a 4 mana, 3/4 with an adventure cost. The adventure is 2 mana and says investigate. You may play an additional land this turn. As a creature, it has flying and vigilance and says whenever Kellan Inquisitive Prodigy attacks, destroy up to one target artifact. If you controlled that permanent, draw a card. So looking on EDH Rec, the most popular strategy is clues and then artifacts, which honestly, it makes sense. But I think there's just so many clue commanders lying around, so I wouldn't want to go that route. If I had to build this commander, I would use this honestly as an excuse to play my favorite green and blue creatures and make this a Legends Matters deck. To be honest, I'd mostly use the commander for the very dependable turn 2 ramp spell every turn to make sure that my turn 3 I have access to 4 lands and any turn 1 ramp cards like Mana Dorks or Utopia Sprawl type enchantments. So rather than playing to attack and destroy an artifact ability, I'd aim to always have good turn 3 plays and be 1 or 2 turns ahead of the curve. So the goal of the deck would be to do what Simic does best: ramp, draw a lot of cards, play some big busted creatures, and I would play my favorite cards and try and just have a different all-star every game. But the bread and butter that I'd have in mind is to cast copy spells that create non-legendary copies of creatures. So here's a few that I'll name in case you're interested in what types of cards can do this. Auton Soldier comes in as a copy that isn't legendary and has Myriad, which is just awesome because then you create 2 more every turn. Then Double Major copies a creature spell, except it isn't legendary. Helm of the Host is a classic. Irenicus's Vile Duplication creates a non-legendary copy. Nanogen Conversion makes every creature on the board a copy of a creature, but not legendary for a turn, including your opponents. So take advantage of attack triggers or abilities that they can't leverage. Another one is Quantum Misalignment, which creates a non-legendary token this turn and has Rebound. Sakashima makes Legend Rule not apply to your own creatures and comes in as a clone. Sakashima the Imposter and Spark Double also come in as non-legendary clones. To keep the list going, we got Storm of Saruman, which copies the second spell in a turn and makes it non-legendary, and Vesuvan Duplimancy makes a non-legendary creature token every time you target a creature of yours. So this, with Quantum Misalignment, makes 2 copies of a creature 2 turns in a row. Then add Orvar the Allform and Mirror Box to make anytime you copy a creature just non-legendary with regular copy spells. One important thing that I will note about this deck that is pretty important is that if you make a non-legendary copy of a legendary creature, every time you cast a regular token copy spell on that non-legendary creature, it maintains that non-legendary status. So for example, if you want to become Public Enemy real quick, in this example, you could make a non-legendary flying copy of Koma Cosmos Serpent with Irenicus's Vile Duplication. If you then cast a Rite of Replication on that token, the new token will also be a non-legendary copy of Koma with flying. I think, with this deck, I could focus on just like the most busted landfall Simic creatures. You got Tatiova, you got AC, but I think honing in on one strategy just feels too linear, and I just want every game to play out differently and give new creatures a chance to shine. So in terms of just a few effects that I think I'd like to include, there's 1, creatures that benefit from casting bigger creatures, since, this is Simic we're playing, so we want to cast big guys. Emoti gives Cascade to every other creature with mana value 6 or greater, so if you make multiple copies, you'll have multiple instances of Cascade. Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter, does a similar thing. You look at the top card, if it's less mana, you cast it for free, if not, you draw a card. Awesome. You can also, with Gandalf Westward Voyager, I think this is just a fun interaction with the board. Yeah, it can draw your opponent's cards, but it can also copy you an extra copy of your Storm of Saruman or Quantum Misalignment for your troubles. And if you don't make a copy, then you draw a card and you know what cards are on the top of your opponent's libraries. Another approach of the deck is to make copies or take your opponent's creatures and make copies of them if they're good enough. Cards like Blatant Thievery can steal a permanent from each opponent. Mind Flayer can steal a creature, then you create a legendary copy with like Right of Replication to sacrifice your opponent's creature before you then make a non-legendary creature to keep both of them. Sakashima's Will and turn all of your creatures into another one for just an overrun effect. I think another really underrated card is Elminster's Simulacrum, which lets you create a token that's a copy of each creature each opponent controls, and it only sees play in 13,000 decks. So with all the legendary and non-legendary creatures this deck makes, Adrix and Nev would double or quadruple those depending on how many Adrix and Nev copies you have on the field. This is the direction that I personally would focus on if I had to build the deck. I'd also, just be sure to include the vegetables like Ramp, maybe creatures like Gwenna could work well. Card draw, we got removal. And as part of the Legends Matter deck, I'd also try to include some creatures with durability that can stack with more copies, the more copies there are. So think multiple copies of gods like Nylea Keen-Eyed for creature cost reduction, Sabsunin for multiple card draws, or Toski also for multiple instances of card draws. It's not the traditional approach for building this commander, but this is the route I think I would enjoy the most, and I just always aim to hit the ground running on turn 3. Okay, the second most unpopular commander from MKM is Tolsimir Midnight's Light with 126 decks. Tolsimir is a 5-mana 3/2 with lifelink that says, when Tolsimir Midnight's Light enters the battlefield, create Voja Fenstalker, a legendary 5/5 green and white wolf creature token with trample. Whenever a wolf you control attacks, if Tolsimir attacked this combat, target creature an opponent controls blocks that wolf this combat if able. Once again, since I'm building this already unpopular commander, I want to take a different approach. Over 2/3 of the decks on EDH Rec are wolf themed. Another approach that came to mind is Creature Fall, meaning cards that have a benefit whenever another creature enters, like Rumor Gatherer or Gala Greeters. And while I will include some of those cards to take advantage of our commander creating a second body, I'm not fully pursuing this route because it works well with blink spells, but our commander's token is legendary. So blinking our commander would kill our token if it's equipped or has counters on it. Since I'm not going the most popular route of Wolf Tribal, my approach for the deck would be a life gain oriented strategy that uses bite and fight effects coupled with anthems to gain life while removing our opponent's creatures. Now, what I mean by bite effects are cards like Bite Down, which there's honestly quite a few of them. I'll share some of those. Rather than fighting, Bite Down causes your creature to deal damage equal to its power to another creature, as opposed to fighting, which allows the creature to deal its damage back to your creature. I like this approach more because our commander has lifelink. So if it is buffed to a 5/6, you could cast a bite spell to kill a creature and gain 5 life, then attack and gain another 5 life. Then if it went unblocked, we could then cast, a fight spell to gain another 5 life. It's funny because you come here for unpopular cards and unpopular takes, possibly. This is one of them. There is not a single Selesnya commander on the list of commanders under the fight theme. But I think that, the life gain from lifelink that our commander has and bite down spells can turn on a lot of white or Selesnya life gain strategies that are not available to the predominantly mono green or Gruul-dominated mechanic that fight and bite spells are. There's a few pillars in this deck that I think I would try and cover. 1 are fight and bite cards. 2 are anthems and creature buffs. 3 is lifelink / deathtouch creatures, or ways to give them those, and a few life gain payoffs. So the first pillar in the deck is having bite cards. Like I said, I wouldn't include every card in this list, but I'm just showing that there are options to pick from in case you aren't aware of some of these cards. There's things like Rabid Bite, Aggressive Instinct, Animist's Might. We got Band Together, Archdruid's Charm. I like Betrayal at the Vault because it does damage twice, so double the life gain. We got Cosmic Hunger, Hard-Hitting Question, Horrific Assault, Hunter's Talent, Legolas's Quick Reflexes, Infectious Bite, Master's Rebuke, Ram Through, Run Over, Signature Slam, and Throw from the Saddle. So I hope you followed. If not, you can pause and read each card individually. Since you target creatures with these abilities, this deck also turns on some commit crime creatures like Free Strider Lookout and Hard Bissell Bandit. Aside from these spells, our commander is incentivized to attack, which will make an opponent's creature block our 5/5 wolf with trample. So I want to make sure that our commander and our wolf can attack safely against most opponents. So anthems like Flowering of the White Tree, Beastmaster Ascension, Honor of the Pure, Mirari's Wake, Paladin's Class, or Sylvan Anthem can all increase our commander's power and all of the tokens that we create. Other cards like Railway Brawler, Good Fortune Unicorn, Tribute to the World Tree, or Renata Called to the Hunt also buff each creature that enters. And since we are casting instants and sorceries with these fight and bite spells, Leonin Light Scribe will make each creature stronger every time we cast a spell in our turn. While lifelink is a great keyword to have, Deathtouch and simple creatures with it like Ankle Biter turns every bite spell that we cast into a kill spell while keeping our creature around as well. There's great ways to give creatures access to these two keywords. We got things like Oren Frostfang, Audric Lunarch Marshal, Sereth the Viper's Fang, Tristani Three Whispers, Behemoth Sledge, Caduceus Staff, Caduceus Staff of Hermes, True Conviction, Basilisk Collar, Dissection Tools, or Eater of Virtue. And the last category would be life gain payoffs. So things like Accomplished Alchemist can turn life gain into mana, Archangel of Thune, Exemplar of Light, Fortifying Drought, Blossoming Bog Beast, Hershka Sweet Tooth, and Lathiel the Bounteous Dawn can buff creatures from life gain. Other cards like Oscillate Pride, Resplendent Angel, the Book of Exalted Deeds, Valkyrie Harbinger, Assemble the Entmoot, and Crested Sunmare can all create creatures based on life gain, and that's honestly not too hard to come by because our commander has 3 power just by default with no anthems, and so one bite spell can activate and turn on a lot of these abilities. Like I said, this is a different approach, but I think the interaction with bite spells and creatures with lifelink and deathtouch is just super fun and can enable fun strategies. On a separate note, I have been saying bite spells, but can anyone comment if they know the correct term for these one-sided fight spells? That brings us to our least played commander from Murders at Karlov Manor, which is Agrus Kos, Spirit of Justice with 122 decks. That's honestly surprising to me because this is not a terrible commander or ability. Agrus is a 4-mana 2/4 Spirit Detective with double strike and vigilance. He says, whenever Agrus Kos, Spirit of Justice enters the battlefield or attacks, choose up to 1 target creature. If it's suspected, exile it. Otherwise, suspect it. As a reminder, Suspect says, a suspected creature has menace and can't block. The most popular strategy for this commander is a blink strategy to take advantage of the second part of the ability, which exiles threats. Honestly, this makes perfect sense, but rather than leveraging our commander for the exile ability, I would build a deck fully focused on the suspect mechanic. A card that embodies the entire goal of this deck is Taunt from the Rampart, which says, goad all creatures your opponents control. Until your next turn, those creatures can't block. So while this card's actions only last a turn, the result demonstrates the vision of what this deck would try to do, which is keep your opponent's big threats around, but instead of exiling them, goad them and give them menace, while also making your other opponent's big creatures have menace and no ability to block each other. As I thought about this deck, it was just super easy to fall into the exact same goad or blink decks as every other. So that's why I wanted to make it even, just a little more different with the heavy spells focus and splash in some spell slinger effects rather than just the same creatures in every strategy. So the main types of outcomes we have are goad spells, blink spells to make our opponent's creatures have menace and not be able to block, then a splash of can't block or extra combat spells, and permanents that double casts. So the first one are goad spells. Since our commander makes creatures have menace, we want those hard to block creatures swinging at our opponents, not us. So cards like Coronation of Chaos can goad the 3 biggest threats on the board, and they can't block our commander if it attacks this turn. Day of the Moon is great because the first creature is goaded, then it will be re-goaded each time you put a new counter on it, and goad another creature as well. This works well with Blink because with creatures like Flicker Wisp, this can be blinked back before the third counter is put on and it's sacrificed, so we just do it again. Disrupt Decorum always, gets every other creature at once. Grenzo Havoc Raiser lets us goad a creature every time one of our creatures deal combat damage. Life of the Party works well with our blink spells because it will create a new token for each of our opponents and goad them permanently every time it enters. Redemption Arc goads the biggest threat on the board and makes it indestructible. And while we're at it, let's throw out Slicer in there to wreak more havoc. Cards like Spectacular Showdown can also be a game ender with the overload cost. Baloth is another classic, and the last one I'll share is Bothersome Closet, which is perfect for this deck. It makes goaded creatures not be able to block, and goads whenever you cast a non-creature spell. And I lied. One last one that can be copied with the later strategy I'll mention is Immortal Obligation, which is a reanimate at instant speed for an opponent's creature that is goaded indefinitely. As a reminder, I'm not saying I would include every card that I just listed. I'm sharing these to show there are multiple options for this pillar of the deck. I was initially thinking of including canceled blocker spells, but the main issue with most of these spells is that they are cast at sorcery speed. But this doesn't really help us because we want our opponent's creatures to not be able to block on our opponent's turns when those big goated creatures are attacking. But there are a few instances we could throw in there like Demoralized, Blind Blast, Order in Chaos, Panic, or Falter, so we could include those. To make the most out of the number of creatures that are not able to block, we can blink our commander with instant spells that double as protection from targeted removal. Cards like Ephemerate, Cloud Shift, Eerie Interlude, Flicker of Fate, and Lazelle's Acrobatics or Getaway Glamour all work. Another round is Sorcery Speed, but this can do work, especially if there's multiple copies that are cast, and every time it enters, we can just suspect another creature, or if we really need to, exile one. Then the last category are payoffs for casting these goad, blink, extra combat, not being able to block spells. Double vision, arcane bombardment, sword of wealth and power, pyromancer's goggles, Chandra Hope's beacon, and a transformed primal amulet are all permanents that can copy spells as long as they remain on the battlefield. Leyline of Resonance works well with single targeted blink spells like Ephemerate, because if we're casting multiple ETB creatures, then we can copy it for multiple ones at a time. These permanents also double up on ramp spells like Big Score or Unexpected Windfall. So something like Double Vision, if you cast one Big Score, you only have to discard one card to draw 4 and create 4 treasure tokens. As I mentioned earlier, for these last 3 commanders, I don't have these decks built, but I'll poll my Discord group to see which of those 3 commanders they would want to see a deck list for the most, and I'd build it. There's Agrus Kos, Tolsimir, or Kellan, and then I'll share that deck list in the deck list channel in the Discord, in addition to the Izoni deck list, which I do have built out. If you've stuck around this far, let me know what you think. I know I included a lot of cards. Is it overwhelming, or did you like the examples that I shared? And with that, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.